Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start you off with the drought monitor today because I've spent some time this weekend thinking about the way this pattern needs to evolve to really be hitting some of these major drought areas in a big way. We did get this newest map released on Thursday, and it showed continual drought development across parts of the South, despite some better rains that did occur over the last 5 to 7 days across parts of the Gulf Coast and more to come in this area. But a lot of the Southeast saw some pretty rapid drought expansion over the last, over the last 4 to 6 weeks. In fact, let's just go have a look at it. Let's go to change maps here. Let's go from 1 week, how about just out to 4 weeks? And there you can see it. So this whole region, parts of the Tennessee Valley, the Southeast up to the Mid-Atlantic, has continued to see degradation in their drought. Now, most of the drought relief that you've seen here has come from 2 events. The big one that happened at the end of October and beginning of November, and then recently some heavier rains that have pushed up out of Mexico into Texas and then stretched across parts of the Southeast. But lately we've gone over very, very dry in parts of the Midwest. And to be honest, that's a pretty telling characteristic of a building El Nino signal. And so we have questions. These same questions I've been posing for weeks is, are we going to continue to see more of an El Nino influence in this pattern going forward? So we'll just kind of walk through that again today and kind of put this story back together. So another way to look at these stats is I want to start at the beginning of the water year. So remember, our water year starts on October 1st and goes to September 30th. So since October 1st, you're looking at precipitation ranks by climate district. And again, it shows that drought development here across this region and also in the Southeast. Now, there's better news for the Southeast in the near term and better news for there's better news for the Southeast over here in the long term and better news for the Southwest in the near term with the current pattern, the way it's set up. But if you look in the middle at the Midwest, you just kind of find this large area that over the last 2 weeks, that's what this goes over, has just continued to see very, very dry conditions. And this is spread into New England as well. So many locations in here, mostly having one event. That would be the one that happened just there at the end of October, coming through to produce this precipitation. Now, because of the setup we had last week, there's that large pulse of moisture that came through here into Texas and kind of got some rain into the Southeast. We had the weak low that went right over the top of the Great Lakes and headed up toward eastern Canada. This was the snowmaker here. And then we've watched the Pacific Northwest really get hit with some strong zonal flow at times. That's why we see so much rainfall here in and around parts of coastal Washington. But with the way this pattern kind of missed so much of the Midwest, we watched this change in the soil moisture maps. This was back on November the 1st. This is 16-inch or 40 centimeter soil moisture percentile, and this is now. And so the Mississippi River at Memphis, which had been making a decent recovery, remember it was down in the basement there at minus 12 feet, bumped up to minus 5. Well, it's back down about minus 7 to minus 8 right now. Because without that moisture coming into this area, we just don't have anything kind of filling into the river. Now, I've made a case, right? I said the second half of this month has got a good shot at seeing 2 big systems roll through the country, getting off of the Rocky Mountains and finally making their way across. We need those 2 systems in a big way. And I was basing a lot of that on just history. The way we kind of see the end of November setting up, when there is an El Nino, when we see the MJO going through the same progression, we can get systems to roll through this area. So let's go and have a look and see if anything's coming. Now, I was watching some satellite data as well, and just look, if I take you back to yesterday, how wide open, the midsection of the country was. We had a 150-mile-an-hour piece of the jet stream going screaming over the Pacific Northwest. In fact, if you watch right here, it's kind of just fascinating to see this. There's a band of lenticular clouds that formed off of the Rocky Mountains in Montana. I'm heading back out to the Pacific Northwest again all week this week, so I'll be excited to get out here and kind of see more of what's going on throughout the Northwest. But here's our subtropical jet influencing the pattern down here from Texas across the south. A lot of heavy rain along the Gulf Coast coming up. But when are we going to kind of fill in the gap in the middle? I mean, that's a big question here overall. And one last thing to point out, right at the end of the animation, you can see some wildfire activity down in Arizona. Just something to keep an eye on. Now, in the water vapor loop, this will be the system we're going to watch for most of this week. It is this low that's trying to cut itself off just off of the west coast of California. So you can kind of see it really emerging here late in the animation. And last week's forecast this time of the week, last Monday, we thought this was going to be closer to California, just really delivering a lot of moisture. But it seems as though it wants to kind of sit there and spin off the coast. So this is what we expect a couple of days from now. The jet stream kind of splitting over the top of it, the subtropical branch coming in underneath, and this low getting cut off here. Now you notice there's what we call a deformation band in here. And normally when you see a deformation band like that, there's a lot of frontogenesis and just massive, amounts of precipitation. But that really only applies when you're on this side of the mountains. There's still deformation here, but it's a different setup overall with who gets the precipitation. So what we need to watch is this, okay? This pattern starting to split is giving hints as to the longer term pattern. I'm talking about 10 days from now as to more big ridging going into Alaska. Keep that in the back of your mind. And if we can keep the subtropical part of the jet reinforcing the flow into the midsection of the country, we could still get our 2 big systems to finish this month. So let's go have a look at what we're expecting in terms of that jet stream activity. So again, I still have to tell you the northern hemisphere view, it's got the whole story to it. So as we play through this week, getting out there toward Wednesday and Thursday, there's our cutoff low. There's the split going over the top. There's the subtropical jet underneath. This is by Thursday. Getting into Friday and Saturday, what we're going to be keeping an eye on is this setup, okay? So subtropical jet comes in. This will give us a warmer and drier go of it as we approach the weekend for the west. And then we're going to keep an eye out on that. See it right here? So that low that was sitting off California coast is going to try to get pushed on shore by this. With the subtropical jet running underneath it, we have questions early next week. Do we get a low ejecting out of the Rocky Mountains coming into the central United States? Possibly a big one. As we play this into Sunday and Monday, look at that. I mean, that is a pretty robust looking trough in the jet stream with a strong subtropical component feeding the bottom side of this. So when I start to see this, this tells me watch for really rapid low pressure development in the midsection of the country. But again, this is next Monday, Tuesday, a week from now. As we play this out there beyond that, this is Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Even though there's a bit of a jet retraction, there's no, I don't see a West Coast ridge that would have me worried about it really just destroying the pattern for the rest of the country. Instead, what I think we're going to be talking about is an omega block over Alaska. And we're going to come back to this in a few moments. But should that occur, once we get out there toward the week of Thanksgiving, really Thanksgiving time frame itself, there's going to be a pretty big storehouse of cold air right here that's going to start to make its way into the country following this subtropical jet. So the pattern is still very interesting, but there's pieces to it that are leading toward the likelihood of actually getting some more moisture into places we really need to see it. But this is what we got for the next 10 days. Okay. Now, good thing we saw that moisture last week into this part of Washington and Oregon, because this is an area that's going to be a little bit drier over the next 10 days. The ensembles are putting decent moisture into California and into the Southwest, much needed there. And there's that flood risk I mentioned along the Gulf Coast. But still, a broader section, if you kind of just look right into this corridor, it could be drier. We're going to wait. It's going to be about 8 days from now, but we're going to wait for this system to kind of pop out in the middle part of the country. Now, this is the ensemble. There's 101 simulations in this. Those simulations are done to kind of account for initialization error. That's why we do this. It's usually our best possible look at the pattern. But we do have operational model runs. And this is what today, the 0Z operational run looks like. Now, notice how much wetter it is up the East Coast. Notice how much bigger the rainfall amounts are expected to be along the Gulf Coast. It still has that same kind of drier corridor in through here, but with the system that's trying to build into early next week, we'll watch this whole region, I think, for the risk of some strong to severe storms as well. And there is another system that's going to be punching into the northwest that's got some big question marks on it in terms of how much snow we could be getting out of this, given that it's going to be supplied with plenty of cold air. So that was kind of rapid fire, but that's it. That's the pieces of this pattern we're going to be looking at. So, let's go try that again. Here's our next 7 days from the WPC. So for a lot of folks, this pattern is still kind of a bit on hold. We're watching the low off of the California coast. That's what's going to be delivering this. We have our kind of subtropical jet feeding the moisture flow into here, which is desperately needed. I mean, this is our driest spot in the country compared to average, Louisiana, Mississippi. But what's brewing in the midsection of the country and what goes up the East Coast, and can we fill in these white areas with having a bit more moisture to get finally a breakaway from these extremely dry conditions we've had so far this month. So let's pick it up here by comparing models. Got the GFS on the left, European on the right. Honestly, both have been performing pretty well over the weekend. Both kind of have similar outlooks, and I think we just need to look at it and see where they start to fall apart. So through the day on Monday, getting into Tuesday morning, again, pull some moisture coming in along the Gulf Coast. and we've got our deeper low off the west coast. Both models resolving this quite well. As we play out toward Wednesday and Thursday, what I'll be watching for is how long and how far into the southeast does the heavier rain kind of linger. It's all going to depend on the placement and extent of this high pressure to the north. You can see it's in both models. Now, by the time we get to Thursday, there is an upper level shortwave that kicks out of Montana and moves, with rapid speed from Montana on Wednesday night to be here on Thursday. And both models captured that pretty well. And as we get into later in the day on Thursday and Friday, that low curls up over the Hudson Bay, and it's going to reinforce a frontal boundary that's going to split right here, through parts of the Great Lakes into Illinois, Missouri, maybe down into Oklahoma. The GFS is a bit faster with its forward progression, so more over Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee with that front. But that one's going to come through and then pull some moisture up the East Coast. It's also going to prevent whatever comes out of the Caribbean here, keep that away from the United States and keep it out over open ocean. So a little bit different timing on the fronts. See them right here between the GFS and the European, which is on the right. But they both sweep through New England, bringing in some much needed rainfall. Now, after that, did you notice how the models are attempting to curl up some sort of a low over Maine and have it hit like the Canadian Maritimes? That's good. I like to see that, because the only way you get deep lows like this forming is if there's some curvature going back in the flow. And as that occurs, we're now into next week. Now watch. The GFS and the European are both ejecting a low here. Now you can see the difference in the European between the GFS and what it's expected to have done with it. But the flow is coming in to the northwest like this, and we're going to watch the subtropical component sneak underneath it. That's halfway decent upper level support to get a sizable system in the midsection of the country. So what we notice here is that by next Monday morning, Monday afternoon and evening, we've got something big brewing in the European model, which has been there all weekend. It's been continuing to forecast this. And it's not to say that there's not something still here in the GFS, although the GFS is just, it kind of fell apart with having something there in the latest run. This has also been something that the European model has shown in multiple runs. Sometimes it comes in a bit farther to the north. Yesterday's 12Z run came in a bit farther to the south, but there's this backup system coming into the northwest that's got some really cold air in it and has the potential. Just look at what the European model's doing with this. Just dumping a lot of snow in the Rockies. GFS says, okay, we'll give you the midsection system. There it is. That would be one of the two big ones I've been thinking about, but nothing for the northwest. So there is some model discrepancy here that we have to think about. But if we put it all together, this is what we end up getting. I'm going to play you through the European model. We're now through Thursday and Friday, getting into Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to park it out there at 1 week. Okay? Because what I want to do is I want to compare the ECMWF, let's blow that up once, to the GFS. So you see how the European model is more aggressive on the development of that system already by next Sunday. The GFS is like, no, not yet. Much different timing. The GFS is much wetter here. This is the Euro. Watch this. Look how much wetter the GFS is up the East Coast. In fact, if we just compare the two models, this is what you get. Remember, these colors down here represent where the GFS is the wetter model and by how much. And these represent where the European is the wetter model and by how much. So notice the GFS, more aggressive on busting the drought here and getting that moisture into New England. The European is better for the west, the southwest, and the central United States on that system early next week. Now, it's that system I've been thinking a lot about. And again, my reasoning is just primarily this is this really dry corridor. And if we can get a system to roll through there, that could help kind of undo some of this. So if we go back to it, here we go. This is the European ensemble. Here's our low, still sitting here on Friday off the coast. Now watch. Going through Saturday into Sunday, and then into Monday. When you look at the European ensemble, there is really strong support from the ensemble members of producing this low in the midsection of the country come next Monday and having it roll straight through going into the Ohio Valley and out the East Coast. There's also decent support on that kicker system on the backside. Remember, I showed you that one with all the colder air that could be putting down some big snow there. So with that being the setup, what we need to find afterward is where does the pattern go? And I see Omega into Alaska. That's going to rip off a lot of cold air in here and give us better chances for another system. And by the way, where are we in the forecast? This is the day before Thanksgiving. So it looks as though the pattern's turning active as we approach the holiday week. Now, probability maps. Now remember, most of these don't capture the full kind of size of this system coming up. So what I've got for you here is the probability from the European ensemble of staying at less than a half inch over the next 10 days. If we're looking on the wet side of it, this is where we have our best chances of getting an inch. And what's been increasing in the models has been this area in through here. All right. So we already know about the west coast of the system that's lingering off the coast before it finally comes over the mountains about a week from now. But overall, this is what we've got in terms of your best chance at getting an inch east of the Rocky Mountains. Now take a look at the Gulf Coast. Remember, deepest drought right in through here. Here's the chance at 2 inches, and here's the chance at 4. So we could get some extremely heavy rainfall down here across the Gulf Coast into Florida this next week, all born on the edge of that subtropical jet coming through. All right. Now, you saw a lot of snow in the previous forecast next week. We're not ready to talk about it yet. We need to see the evolution. I'll keep you updated every morning on that. What I do want to get to is back to this block. Now, look at the size of this thing. That is a huge omega block setting up. And I'm going to call it a block because it appears that this is going to be there for at least 7 days. And that's going to dislodge that cold air and send it across the United States, which will increase our contrast of cold north, warm south. And if you get that going, that's what increases the pressure gradient, cranks out systems. So starting next, really starting on Thanksgiving, well, maybe a day or two before, that omega block right there, that's going to be key to finish this month. So right now, the models, if you probably saw this over the weekend, if you were watching the weather, you notice that everything our government kept putting out was like wet week 2. And then you see that the European ensemble is just wet week 2. A lot of folks seeing above average precipitation. That is all complements of this pattern. And we want to know, is that the kind of pattern we expect to see? We've seen a lot of troughing in the West as of late. And maybe that's a little uncharacteristic of an El Nino, but this is what we've got right now, and I think it's being driven mostly by the MJO. Now, before I dig into that, I do want to show you the latest I've got on the temperatures, because there's some big change coming in this. Here's your frost map over the next 7 days, and those high temperatures are going to evolve something like this. It's going to be very mild across the midsection of the country, cold south. I mean, we have temperatures here that might be getting up to almost 30 degrees warmer than normal on Tuesday. We go into Wednesday, look at all this warmth in the midsection of the country. This is all rain-cooled air, cloud cover down here. But all of this is just lack of, deep troughs and slight ridging, split flow, not a whole lot of precip, and it's just warm. That's Thursday into Friday. Getting into Saturday and Sunday. We're still watching most of this week very mild conditions in the midsection of the country. But this will be the end of it. Next week is when we start to expect some change. Let me show it to you. Here's your next 5 days. But here's day 5 through 10. See it? Next 5 days, day 5 through 10. Now watch the change due to the big ridge building into Alaska. Day 10 through 15. And we talked about this a bit on Friday, right? Like, hey, I said, watch this because if we get something to dislodge that cold air, it's going to come across the country. And if you start to see the warmth here and the colder weather here, in between is the activity. So that's why I think we could still get our 2 big systems to finish this month, of November. And it just comes back to that narrative. Can we erase some of these deficits in the midsection of the country to the mid-Atlantic and up to the New England area just to finally get some better precipitation in these regions? So let's see what the CPC thinks the rest of the month's going to look like. This is November 25th, all the way into the beginning of December, actually. And they've kind of bit into what we see coming here as to it sticking around. What I'm talking about is troughing west and ridging east. So they're mild east, cooler west. That's a lot of activity for the west and wetter in the south. And so you look at this and go, all right, I see persistence in their forecast. Is it anywhere else? Is it in the European as well? And this is the new outlook from the European model, but I'm going to go out even farther. This goes all the way to Christmas. So this is the 30-day outlook from November 25th to December 25th, and they're trying to keep western U.S. troughs around. And with that, you can imagine what the precipitation pattern is going to look like during those 30 days. It's pretty wet in the west and south, and there's really not a large area of the country that sees an extended shot at drier air. Now, if you're watching this going, wait a minute, Snodgrass, you kind of told us that November had a better look like this as well. And October had a better look like this as well. And October did finish wet, but November's coming dry. And you're right, I did. And it was because we had thought we would be seeing repeated West Coast troughs more than we did. And the reality was the flow backed off, got real zonal, and that prevented us from really getting that moisture just to continue to stream through, north to south across North America. So I get it. There's a big question mark on this, but there is some supporting evidence for it. I want to build that case for you. We've watched El Nino continue to build. There's a lot of warm water in the Atlantic. We've got some cooler water here in the Gulf of Alaska, part of our negative PDO signal. And the Indian Ocean dipole is still a dominant signal overall. I think this might be our most dominant signal. So what this is doing is this is giving us over the next 15 days strong trades in this direction. But these westerly wind bursts right in through here are really giving us a hint that El Nino is going to kind of just pulse into this pattern pretty effectively. Remember, I told you to be watching for the Southern Oscillation Index to drop once we got here to the middle of this month. Well, that's the change we were seeing. So now we're kind of moving toward an atmospheric pattern that is more El Nino-y, if that makes sense. And when I say that, you just think subtropical jet development, all right? So with all of that being said, if the MJO is going to respond, it's going to live over here in phase 8 and 1. That'll be where it tends to go. So you noticed it came out earlier in the month here and then went right back to where it had been. It's probably going to sweep around and go, no, get back over here and resist going into phases 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's probably going to want to spend more time in phase 8 and 1. Now, all of those things I just mentioned are to tell you that this is what we expect out of the flow to be more frequent. Not every day, but it means that we're going to get these, pulses coming off of the Pacific Ocean in terms of the jet's behavior, likely bunching up into Alaska. I mean, look at that. That is an omega pattern, and that just drives troughs into the west. And because it's so bunched up here, and we have downstream deep trough into Europe and a big ridge here over this part of Russia, you get another ridge in this place. And I think we're going to see that pattern a lot between now and the beginning of December, and maybe through December as well. There might be a lot of West Coast troughing through the month of December. That's it. That's the pattern I think we're going to see on repeat. And that's what gives me hope for the two systems to finish this month and maybe a pretty active December overall. Now, I'm working on some new stuff for you in the long range. It just takes me a while to kind of get that coding done given my travel schedule for work and just other commitments. But I have something new kind of cooking in the kitchen for us, and I'm excited to kind of reveal it here pretty soon. But as it stands, that's what I'll be watching. Okay, just a quick reminder, we will get some new additional long-range data this week from other modeling centers, plus the CPC I think will give us a new outlook by the end of the week. But just a reminder where all of the models pretty much stand December through February. This is kind of their look on precipitation. So just want to show you that again. Okay, the last thing I want to cover is South America, and it comes down to this graphic for Mato Grosso showing the significant drop-off in planting progress. Now you notice that we're only about 4% off of the 5-year average. But the question is, with this area right in through here, how much needs to be replanted? Because we endured some pretty substantial heat in northern Brazil, and as of late, it's gone over very, very dry. I was just watching some of the satellite data here, and this is from one of our NOAA satellites. On the 5th, getting to the 6th and 7th and 8th, I'm telling you, you may not know what I'm looking at here, but normally we've got large clusters of thunderstorms like this just all over north central Brazil. And instead, all of the heaviest rains have been in southern Brazil, with just isolated storms kind of popping here throughout much of northern and central Brazil. And then sometimes there's just nothing. Middle of the day, just clear skies. And the farther to the west you go, you start to see some smoke coming out of, Bolivia, down here toward Paraguay. Like there's been quite a bit of smoke here, and some of the Amazon as well. But these kind of convective showers, these are not what they can be. They can be usually just large, like this. You tend to get a lot of these. So you have a couple of folks that are getting some rain, but this isn't quite the pattern that just delivers the very, very heavy rain into this area. It's all to the south. So I'm showing you that because I want to make a case here for a couple of different animations. There have been storms that have rolled through, but overall for the last week, we've been drier here with just very sizable complexes. Look at the storms rolling through southern Brazil, just huge storms. In fact, this didn't quite finish here. Let's see if I can click play and get it to finish. But just very large storm complexes continue to roll through southern Brazil. Let's see if we can get this all the way out here to the weekend rainfall. Now watch this. There it is. Look at that. That just came in. Heavy, heavy rainfall down there. Now, I was looking a bit at some satellite data to try to assess NDVI, or vegetation health. And what's interesting is compared to a year ago, we're better here. But remember, that was an exceptional drought. And we're worse here, worse throughout the Amazon, and worse kind of coming off the Bolivian Ridge. So we need to see if these numbers continue to degrade with time, because if you look at the forecast, this is the newest European run. Now through middle of this week, end of this week, we aren't adding up anything in this area except for the flooding in southern Brazil. So out through Thursday, getting into Friday, Saturday, the weekend, very, very wet south. Some places picking up an extra 4 inches of rain. And then you get a little bit farther north, and the models always want to do this. Ready? Week 2, bring it in. See that? They just want to dump rain later. Now, if this occurs and if this stays as a consistent theme, this would literally be nick of time rain. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. But I want to let you know, the operational runs keep doing this, but the ensembles aren't really on board with it. They're keeping most of this area quite dry, trying to bring in a little bit of moisture late in the time period, about day 7 through 10. Meanwhile, flooding south, and that's going to be an ongoing story. So I want to show you one other piece of this. During the next 7 days when it's extremely dry in this area, take a look at what the temperatures are expected to do. This map just goes out to Thursday. This is just a taste of what the temperatures are going to be like, because what it's showing you is the probability of going over 100 Fahrenheit by 18Z. I mean, 18Z is just the early afternoon, going over 100 Fahrenheit. The nighttime lows are going to be high, but there's a 80 to 100% chance throughout most of this area of having those temperatures get that hot, which means Brazil's issues are going to continue to be a main story throughout this week and possibly into early next week. That rain does manifest. As I said, that is literally last possible second to get good rain into a broad area. We'll watch that trend all week. One last thing to point out here, some global weather pattern stuff just to talk about. I'm going to focus, you can kind of pause the map and look at any region you want, but Europe's got a pretty active week this week. Better rains throughout Australia. I mean, that's odd during an El Nino year, but they've got it. And then I want to note, right into Panama, we're seeing quite a bit of convective activity around, but are we getting the moisture into Panama? That's going to be the big question. We'll take a closer look later this week. Okay, it's a long way to start off your Monday morning, but these are the things I'm watching, and we'll keep an eye on it this week and watch the pattern evolve together. I'll talk to you tomorrow morning from Salem, Oregon. We'll talk to you then. Thanks.